This isn't a story about a missing person, not really. It's a story about time. The crushing, relentless march of it, and the one terrifying moment it completely, inexplicably stood still. Welcome back to Forgotten Ties. Look around you. Everything moves. The second hand on a cheap wall clock, the shadow of a street lamp crawling across the floor, the relentless pulse in your own wrist. Time is the one constant, the universal truth. But for Elias Vance, time isn't a concept. It's a gaping, jagged wound that never quite heals. Because for Elias, time died exactly at 4:37 p.m. on a Thursday in late October, the day his daughter, Clara, vanished. Elias wasn't a man who dealt in mysteries. He was a stone-cold pragmatist, a structural engineer whose life was built on predictable foundations, load-bearing walls, tensile strength, and meticulous planning. His world was orderly, precise, right up until the moment it wasn't. Clara, his only child, was 7. All vibrant chaos and bright, unruly curls the color of burnt sienna. She was the delightful deviation in his perfectly plotted life, a splash of wild color in a blueprint. Their routine was simple, bordering on ritualistic. Every Thursday, after school, they'd meet in the little park just 3 blocks from their brownstone in the quieter, older part of Pittsburgh. Clara would swing, Elias would check structural diagrams on his tablet, and she'd inevitably ask for a story about the family. Not a new story, always the same one. The tale of the watch. The watch was a Patek Philippe from 1942, a heavy, solid piece of engineering, but more than that, it was the family's anchor. It had survived World War II, a fire in '85, and a decade of teenage recklessness on Elias's own wrist. It wasn't just metal and gears. It was a silent record of every Vance life for 3 generations. Elias wore it every single day, kept perfect time. In a chaotic world, the watch was a quiet, metallic promise that things would continue, that order prevailed. That Thursday, the air had a metallic, autumnal crispness. Elias was sitting on the park bench, his back to the old oak, sketching out a bridge design. He glanced up, expecting to see Clara's familiar silhouette bursting from the school gate. He didn't. He waited. For 15 p.m. 4:25 p.m. Elias felt the first cold twist of unease in his gut. It wasn't like Clara to be late. Not ever. She was as ritualistic as he was. He checked his wrist. The Patek Philippe was working perfectly. He stood, walking briskly toward the school, a small, tight knot of anxiety pulling at his chest. The schoolyard was eerily quiet. A single janitor was locking the side gate. Elias approached, his voice unusually steady despite the tremor in his hands. No, the janitor hadn't seen a little girl with bright, sienna hair. Classes were dismissed at 3:30. Elias ran back to the park bench, his mind frantically cataloging possibilities. Maybe she went home? No, they always met here. A prank? Clara wasn't malicious. As he reached the bench, he noticed a small detail that shouldn't have been there. Lying neatly on the worn wood, exactly where he'd been sitting, was Clara's little bright red knitted wool hat, the one her grandmother had made. It was placed, not dropped, and next to it, the wind barely ruffling its edges, was a single folded piece of thick parchment-like paper. His heart began to hammer a deafening rhythm against his ribs. He unfolded the paper. There was no handwriting, no ransom note, no threat. Just a perfectly rendered sketch. A drawing, crude but unmistakable, of the family watch. The Patek Philippe, the one still ticking reliably on his wrist. And then a sound. The loudest silence he had ever heard. He raised his arm. He looked at the watch. The minute hand was frozen at 37 minutes past the hour. The second hand, the one that usually swept with such defiant, perpetual motion, was absolutely violently still. The power reserve on this watch was 44 hours. It was a modern mechanical marvel. It simply did not stop. Not unless it was physically destroyed. He shook his wrist. Nothing. He held it to his ear. Silence. Utter, complete silence. Elias looked up at the sun, then down at the sketch of the watch, and then back at the frozen piece of metal on his wrist. It wasn't 4:38 p.m. It was 4:37 p.m. Forever. The time his daughter was taken. This wasn't fate. This wasn't coincidence. This was an impossible, deliberate act of malice. Someone didn't just take his daughter. They broke the one constant in his life, and they did it with a chilling, surgical precision that suggested they knew everything about him. The watch had not stopped. It had died. And the horror was, Elias suddenly, devastatingly understood. This was only the beginning of their conversation. A conversation held in absolute silence, and punctuated by the single, impossible, frozen moment on his wrist. The police, of course, were useless about the watch. They catalogued the scene. The neatly placed hat, the strange, expert drawing of the timepiece. They focused on the usual, the last known sighting, the neighborhood canvas, the frantic checks of sex offender registries. Elias tried to explain, tried to convey the chilling, almost metaphysical violation of the frozen watch. But the lead detective, a pragmatic, tired woman named Miller, just gave him the polite, pitying stare of someone listening to a man whose mind was fraying under impossible stress. "Mr. Vance," she'd said, tapping a pen on her notepad. "We understand this watch is important, a sentimental object, but we need facts. Perpetrator profile, maybe a vehicle, an unstable connection." Elias cut her off, his voice a low, furious rasp. "The perpetrator profile is the watch, detective. He didn't just stop it. He sent a message that he could touch the most sacred, predictable thing in my life. He's an engineer, Miller, a dark mirror. He knows how a Patek Philippe works. He knows the precision, the balance wheel. To stop that watch without visible damage, that takes a specific, terrifying kind of knowledge. He is mocking my order, my precision. He wouldn't take the watch off. It became a morbid, constant weight, a monument to a moment." Elias stopped eating, stopped sleeping, trading his architect's precision for a frantic, obsessive kind of detective work that no one else understood. He started his investigation not from the park, but from the watch itself. He took the heirloom to the only man he trusted with it, an elderly, almost blind Swiss watchmaker named Herr Dietrich, who ran a tiny, dusty shop tucked away in a quiet New York alley. Dietrich took one look at the Patek, and the old man's hands, usually steady as marble, began to tremble. "Impossible," Dietrich whispered, his voice thin as tissue paper. He put it under a jeweler's loupe. "There is no scratch, no dent. The mainspring is intact. But it is seized. Not broken, but held. As if a force has simply gripped the balance wheel. A sudden, massive electromagnetic pulse. Perhaps? No, that would fry the delicate components. This is surgical." Elias leaned in, his eyes burning with a dark, manic intensity. Could someone have stopped it remotely? A signal? Dietrich shook his head slowly. "Not this watch. It is pure mechanics. Gears, pivots, springs. No electronics. For this to stop in this way, someone had to physically intervene, or there is a force at play we do not understand. And the fact that it stopped precisely on a single minute, not between minutes, suggests a perfect synchronization." The revelation chilled Elias to the bone. Not just an engineer, but someone with access to incredible, specialized equipment, or maybe even an obsession with mechanics and timing as profound as his own. He returned to Pittsburgh, the silent watch a leaden weight on his wrist, and began to obsessively document the watch's history. He interviewed his aging relatives, dug through dusty papers, hunting for anyone, any enemy, any forgotten connection that might explain the deliberate cruelty. That's when he found the photograph. It was in a shoebox of his mother's old things, a faded black and white image from the late 1960s. It showed his father, a young man then, sitting with a group of 4 other engineering students at Carnegie Mellon. They looked earnest, ambitious, ready to change the world. But it was the detail that made Elias's stomach plummet. One of the men in the photo, a dark-haired, intense young man with piercing eyes, a man Elias had never seen, was wearing a wristwatch. A different model, sure, but the angle, the placement, the obvious pride with which he wore it. It was the image of an heir, an apprentice to the metal and gears. And right next to that man, leaning in conspiratorially, was his own father. The caption, Scrawled on the back in his mother's looping handwriting, read, "The CMU-5, the future of precision, except for the one they called the ghost. He never wore the heirloom. The ghost." Elias ran a feverish finger across the photograph. 5 students, but the caption implied a 6th who was integral but absent. A silent, unseen member. And the man with the intense eyes, the one wearing the other prestigious watch, was named in another, smaller note, Julian Thorne. A name, a lead, a chilling flicker of a past tied inextricably to his present horror. Julian Thorne. Was he the dark mirror? The man who understood the language of precision so well he could break it? Elias realized he had been looking for a random abductor, a street criminal. He should have been looking for an enemy forged in the fires of his own family's ambition. An enemy who had spent decades waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect mechanism, to stop Elias Vance's life, permanently, at 4:37 p.m. The conversation had started, and the first word was a name from the past. He had to find out who the ghost was, and what legacy of bitterness they held. Elias's search for Julian Thorne was a descent into a tunnel of obsolescence. He found records. Thorne was brilliant, specializing in advanced kinetic physics, a field bordering on the theoretical. But the trail went cold in the late 1980s, right around the time Elias's father had successfully launched a highly publicized, proprietary bridge-building technique that made the Vance name synonymous with unbreakable. It was the kind of success that bred professional jealousy, the kind that festered. But the ghost, that was the key. Who was the 6th member, the one who never wore the heirloom? Elias returned to his father's papers, ignoring the engineering schematics and focusing on the personal journals, the things kept tucked away in the back of a fireproof safe. He found a series of entries, written in the shaky hand of a man who was clearly stressed, dating from 1978. October 12, 1978. "We did it. The CMU-5. Thorne is furious. Says the patent is morally compromised. He's always been the moral core, the purist. He wants nothing to do with the money. Says it's tainted. But Julian knows the real truth. He saw us. October 20th, 1978. The ghost is gone. He just left, dropped out. Thorne says he was fleeing the contamination. He was the most brilliant of us all, truly. The one who understood time better than any of us. He never cared about the money, only the mechanism. We called him the ghost because he was almost invisible, meticulously working on his own project. My God, I wish he'd come back. He's the only one who can talk sense into Julian." The journal entry sent a jolt of ice through Elias. The one who understood time better than any of us. The narrative shifted. Julian Thorne was the angry, visible man who lost, but the ghost was the true architect of the bitterness. He was the one obsessed with the mechanism, the perfect, pure movement of time. And the stopping of the watch, the single, impossible surgical cessation, was his signature. It wasn't about money. It was about a philosophical correction. Elias realized his father and his friends must have stolen the ghost's core idea, monetized it, and the man had vanished, taking his purity and his knowledge of time with him. The horror intensified when Elias cross-referenced the ghost's departure date with his father's records. The patent for the unbreakable technique was filed 3 weeks after the ghost left. But Elias had a name. Buried deep in an old-school yearbook, a tiny, almost hidden name beneath the primary group photo, Alistair Kane. Listed as a research assistant, uncredited. Alistair Kane, the ghost. Elias traced Kane to a dilapidated, isolated workshop in rural Ohio, a place that wasn't on any tax or utility records, but which was clearly visible on satellite maps. A perfectly square, windowless structure, almost a bunker, built with the cold, precise certainty of a civil engineer. Kane was not hiding. He was simply existing outside the system. Elias drove for 10 hours, the frozen Patek Philippe burning against his skin, the second hand a silent taunt. He found the building set back from a gravel road, surrounded by an oppressive, suffocating silence. He broke the lock, the sound of the metal snapping echoing in the still air. Inside, the workshop was not the cluttered mess of a recluse. It was pristine, organized to the millimeter. Tools were racked like surgical instruments, and everywhere, on every clean metal surface, were clocks. Not just watches, but clocks. Grandfather clocks, marine chronometers, tiny quartz pieces, all taken apart, their mechanisms laid out like anatomical diagrams. Kane was not a collector. He was a dissector of time. In the center of the room, on a stainless steel workbench, was a complex, beautiful contraption. It looked like a cross between a particle accelerator and a gigantic pendulum clock. Its purpose was opaque, but its function was terrifying. Next to it lay a stack of documents. Elias snatched them up. They weren't engineering notes, they were psychological profiles. And the very first one, meticulous and annotated, was about Clara Vance. Her school schedule, her habits, her love for her father's predictable foundations. And then, a single final annotation, written in a spidery, precise hand. The anchor must be seized at the moment of maximum vulnerability. T equals 4:37 p.m. He didn't need to find Kane. The man was gone, but he had left a message, an answer to the question of how the watch stopped. Tucked beneath the profile, there was a small velvet bag. Inside, a single tiny, perfectly formed metal shard, almost microscopic, designed to fit precisely into the gap between the balance wheel and the bridge of a Patek Philippe. It was a pin, a surgical instrument of cessation. The watch wasn't electromagnetically pulsed. It was physically, meticulously pinned in place. Elias sank onto the concrete floor, his lungs struggling for air. This man, the ghost, had spent 40 years building the perfect, silent assassination of a family's future. All because of an old grudge and a stolen concept of purity. He was a killer who used timing as his weapon, a man so precise he could insert a microscopic pin into a mechanical watch and know exactly when its final catastrophic tick would be. But there was one last thing on the workbench, a small, portable display monitor showing a live feed, not of Clara, but of a quiet, unassuming man in a gray suit, walking down a busy street in Washington, D.C. The man was carrying a briefcase. A ticker at the bottom of the screen read, Julian Thorne, ETA to Senatorial Annex, 3 hours, 14 minutes. The ghost hadn't just taken Clara. He had set a mechanism in motion. Clara was the bait. Julian Thorne, the other angry man from the photograph, was the target. And the ghost was about to strike the final, most public blow in his 40-year war against the CMU-5 and their contaminated success. Elias looked at his frozen watch, a dead piece of time on his wrist. He was trapped between a silent past and a rapidly accelerating future. He had 3 hours and 14 minutes. 3 hours and 14 minutes. It wasn't a warning. It was a deadline, set by a clockmaker who treated human lives like faulty gears to be surgically corrected. Elias knew instantly what the ghost was planning. Julian Thorne, the visible partner in the betrayal, was set to enter the Senatorial Annex, a highly secure government building. Whatever Kane had planned, it would be perfectly timed, highly destructive, and designed to shame and break the legacy of the CMU-5 in the most public forum possible. Clara was not the primary victim. She was the trigger. Elias grabbed his phone and called Detective Miller, his voice raw but controlled, dispensing facts with the same detached precision he used when calculating a structural load. Detective, listen to me. This isn't a missing person. It's a terrorist plot, driven by a 40-year-old grudge. The target is Julian Thorne. He's heading to the Senatorial Annex in D.C. The perpetrator is Alistair Kane, the ghost. He's using my daughter as leverage to force Thorne to carry something. He has a remote detonator or a time device. He planned this to the second. Miller, bless her pragmatic soul, almost hung up. Mr. Vance, this is rambling. We have teams on the ground in Pittsburgh. The ground is in Ohio, and the target is D.C. Elias roared into the phone. My father and Thorne stole Kane's life work, a theory of absolute timing. He used a microscopic pin to stop my watch at the exact second he took Clara. The time on my wrist, 4:37 p.m. It's the only truth. Now, call DC Security. Tell them to search Julian Thorne's briefcase. He's the unwilling delivery system. He hung up, not waiting for a response. He was 100 miles from Washington, D.C., with a dead timepiece on his wrist, facing a killer who manipulated time itself. The watch was a constant reminder. He was late. He had been late since the moment it stopped. Elias drove like a madman, his engineer's mind running parallel calculations. Distance, speed, the inevitable DC traffic. He knew the police wouldn't move fast enough based on the ravings of a grieving father. He had to intersect the mechanism. He pulled over just outside DC, his hands slick on the wheel. He called the senatorial annex directly, using his identity as a world-renowned structural engineer. "This is Elias Vance. I was hired by the Pentagon to consult on the annex's foundation stability. There is an immediate catastrophic structural threat. A compromised kinetic load-bearing beam. You have 20 minutes to evacuate. Get Julian Thorne out now." It was a lie, a high-stakes, terrifyingly specific engineering lie designed to trigger a full-scale building lockdown and evacuation, the only thing that could stop Thorne's programmed entry. He raced toward the annex, arriving just as the sirens began to wail, and Thorne, looking confused and irritated, was being pulled from his sedan by frantic security. Elias pushed through the crowd, his eyes fixed on the man who had wronged the ghost. "Thorne, where is the briefcase?" Julian Thorne, older, heavier, but with the same piercing eyes from the photograph, was struggling with security. "What? Who are you?" "I'm due to speak." "Your briefcase." "Kane, the ghost. He took my daughter." Elias screamed, grabbing Thorne's arm and pointing at the motionless Patek on his own wrist. "He stopped the family watch at 4:37. He's using you to finish his work." Thorne's face, pale under the streetlights, finally fractured. He stared at the watch, the frozen, impossible time. His eyes widened in absolute terror. "The ghost, Alistair." Thorne stammered, his body collapsing against the security guard. "The briefcase, it's his final kinetic theory, a silent resonant frequency device. I thought it was just plans. He said I had to carry it. He promised." He hadn't been forced at gunpoint. He'd been promised something, perhaps the very recognition he'd been denied decades ago. Security, finally alerted by the building's structural engineer on the phone and the frantic scene, seized the briefcase. A remote-controlled bomb squad robot was deployed. They confirmed a complex, unique device, not explosives, but a kinetic resonator designed to find and exploit the natural resonant frequency of the annex's main support pillars, essentially shaking the building to dust from the inside out, perfectly timed to cause maximum, devastating collapse. The annex was saved. Julian Thorne was arrested. Alistair Kane, the ghost, was nowhere to be found, but the evidence in his Ohio bunker proved the conspiracy beyond doubt. And Clara? She was found 2 hours later, safe. Kane had left her in a small, abandoned toolshed near the Pittsburgh park, asleep and unharmed, a final, cruel piece of precision in his design. He had released the trigger once his mechanism, the briefcase, was successfully delivered to the target. Her safe return was not an act of mercy, but an act of Kane's own perverse, mechanical perfection. The moment the bomb squad confirmed the device, Kane had fulfilled his end of the equation. Elias held his daughter tightly, her bright sienna curls a stark, beautiful contrast to his pale, exhausted face. The watch remained on his wrist, a dead, silent piece of metal. He took it off, finally, for the first time in weeks, and put it away. It wasn't an anchor anymore. It was a memory, the terrifying memory of the day time died, and the cold, hard truth that even the most perfect mechanism can be broken by a single, perfectly placed pin. The ghost is still out there, a master of timing, a killer whose weapon is precision. He failed to destroy the building, but he succeeded in his true goal, shattering the orderly, predictable life of Elias Vance. Time has started again for Elias, but it's a time now tainted by the knowledge that some evil is so methodical, so surgically precise, it operates on a completely different, terrifying clock. We may never see Alistair Kane again, but believe me, he's watching the clock. And every one of us right now is on his schedule. If this terrifying journey into the mechanics of malice has caught your attention, If you want to be the first to know when we uncover another chilling tale from the past, you know what to do. Like this video, subscribe to Forgotten Ties, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next tick of the clock. Until then, keep your own time and stay safe.